go. Okay, Mograph. So we talked a little bit just quickly about how to the standard way of using type that we've talked about before is just to take a text spline, right, and a extruded NURBS, pop it in there, and there you have text that you can work with. So that's still a good option for many things. If we want to speed this up and have more dynamics added to text and type, then we can use what's called Mograph. And Mograph has its own text called MoText. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and just pop one of these in here. The first thing that we'll notice is that it automatically gives you three-dimensional text, which is a good speeding point, right? That'll speed things up quite a bit. I'm just going to move this over so I can see the Attributes Manager a little bit better. So let's just go through some of the things that are in the Attributes Manager for this MoText. Essentially, we have a similar kind of palette that we've seen before. If you go to Object, you can change the text here. So I'm just going to call this UNH 3D. All right, and of course you can change the font if you want to. I don't know. I always like Helvetica, and I'm just going to make this bold. All right, so there we go. That's something to work with. So this is kind of similar to the using the spline text and then the extrusion. We can change the depth of it. So if we want to make this thicker, right, you can just change the depth there. Subdivisions, you can include more subdivisions if you like. Okay. Of course, like if you're going to eventually do a deformer tools on this, like if you wanted to bulge this out later on, you want to add more segments, right? Because remember, if with the deformer tools, more segments equals smoother transitions. So that's a possibility for subdivisions if you're thinking about that ahead of time. Okay, the alignment, this can be important depending upon how you want your motion to happen, right? So you can align it from the left, from the middle. That'll put the the global position in the middle here instead. So you can change that from left to right to middle. Height, of course, we can change the height of this thing. What the scale is, of course, do that all here. Horizontal spacing becomes important, right? You can stretch this out. And of course, any of these things can be animated as well, right? Remember last time we talked about using different types of animation, and if you have the auto keyframe on, and notice there's a little button next to here, so you could animate the horizontal spacing, you could animate the depth. A lot of these things could be animated. The other thing that's really cool about this is, how many of you know what kerning is? Okay, you've talked about it in typography. Excellent. So if you go to kerning, you can turn this on, right? And then notice that it gives you the letters get broken apart, and you can select individual letters. So let's just say the 3, for example. If I click on this, hello, there we go. I zoom in a little bit. I can scale this down individually. So I can shrink this down a little bit, right? It's keeping the space the same between the letters. But I could essentially scale this individually if I wanted to design this a little bit. You can also move it up and down, right? So, up and down, right? If you're using, letters like TH or things like that, you can have them smaller and set up a little bit higher. So that's a possibility. So you can do that for individual letters, and you can also, if you open this palette up, you can do it for all the letters. So you can really control the design of how the elements are laid out using the kerning tab. So that could be really important to use as well. So that's much different that's definitely one thing that's different than using the extruded text that we talked about before. So that would be something to explore in those things. Okay, finally we have caps which we can utilize. So again, if we use a fillet cap for the front and the back, and I don't know, one step, then we have, this is similar to the extruded text as well. We can have some of that dimensional sort of form. So that's good. Let's see. Okay, the other thing that's important to note about Mograph text is that it is dynamic, which means that you can have elements affect the text. So for example, if we move over here, we have these little tabs that say effects. This affects all of them. Individual lines, if you want just individual lines of text to be affected. Single words or even letters. Okay? And so what we can do here is we can go to the Mograph tab again, and there are all these different effectors. Okay? Each one of them does something different. I'm not going to go through all of them now. I'm just going to talk about some of the easy ones. And then, if you want to research more of them, you can do that outside of class. I'll go into a little bit more in depth next class as well. But just as a quick example, let's just add in a random effector. So if we pop in a random effector, notice what happens. Suddenly, all of a sudden, it changes the position of our text, right? So it's randomly organized it in the along the X, Y, and Z, right? So it's a little bit out of alignment on the Z. It's definitely out of alignment on the X and also on the Y. So it's changed all those parameters. And then if we go to back to our mode text, what happens is that when you drop in the effector for the first time anyway, it will automatically put itself in this effects. Okay, so in order for the Mograph effector to work, it has to be put down into this tab. All right, so if we get rid of this. The way to do that is just simply, when this is selected, you just drag this down here and drop it in, and then it automatically affects your text. Okay, so then what we can do is we can click on the random. It doesn't have to be a parent or a child or anything like that. Okay, it just needs to be in that tab to be in there. Let's just see. So some of the things that we can change here, if we just go to Effector. What I like about this is it has a seed. So there's a random thing that's calculated based on some algorithm. I don't know what it is. But what I like about this is you can just simply change the seed and get all kinds of different placements. Right? So just by changing that alone, you can get all kinds of different types of positions of those letters. We could also change the strength. Right? So the strength, if it's at 0, it's our original formation. And of course you can animate this, right? So you could slowly animate this to sort of change out of position and then go back again, or vice versa, right? So the strength can be important. You can have different types of things happen there. You can also change the minimum and maximum, so how much of that is affected. That gets affected as well. If we go to parameter, then we can notice that it's position, scale, and rotation. So right now it's just the position that's affected, and then you can manually go in and change, how much is affected by the X, let's say. If we wanted it, here, let's just change this back to 50. Oops, come back. There we go. Change this to 50. If we make these 0, then you can see the difference here. All right. So right now it's only affecting the X axis, right? So if I increase this, let's say to like 200, then it's going to, affect the position there. If I don't want that, keep that at 0. Then let's say the Y, for example, I can make this like 300, and it's going to have randomness just along the Y axis, right? So all of these are in line perfectly. They're same spacing that we had originally, but they're going up and down based on the random position of the Y scale. Right? So you can control, and of course you can animate each one of those individually as well. So that becomes really kind of an important tool to use. So parameter, then you can change the position, the scale can change, and of course in order to change the scale we need to consider adding some numbers here, right? And it's going to be random, it's not going to be uniform. Okay? If you want it to be uniform scale, you can click on uniform scale and they'll go back to that uniform scale, of course. We clicked off, then we have different sorts of scales. And then finally, rotation. Each one of these has a tab that you can change the rotation. Right? So if we change all of these, then suddenly we have this text that is... So in some of those examples we saw, you saw these strange like rotating text in all kinds of different formations, right? And then coming back perfectly. It's just animated in reverse. Right? It's starting out with this, and then let's go here, Effector, and then slowly going back to that. Okay? Right? So off screen we had this flying into space, things slowly coming together and then meeting there. Right? So a lot. This is used a lot, and we've seen many examples of that. and of course, just those simple sort of animations can be very effective. So that's the random effector. I think that's a really interesting one to play around with. And for these effectors, the thing to do is really just to play. Experiment, push buttons, move sliders around, see what happens, see how they get affected, and the different types of things that you can do. And of course, play around with the auto keyframing and just see what happens over 90 seconds, what you can do to get those things to come together. All right, one more effector that I'm going to talk about, which is already sort of animated. So I'm just going to go to my MoText, and in the letters, I'm just going to delete this. All right, and if it's not in the palette, then it won't be affected at all. Okay, so it has to be, again, it has to be in one of these palettes in order for it to affect that. So I'm going to go up to Effector again, and I'm just going to choose the formula one. Formula is, it looks like a wave, a sort of a waving spline, and that's pretty much what it is. It's going to animate the position and the scale and the rotation based on this sort of like undulating curve, or this spline. So if I just hit play now, it's going to be, moving in and out like crazy, right? So this can be useful maybe in more subtle ways. Let's change it down here a little bit. There we go. Just a subtle bit of animation, or even maybe less, can be kind of interesting. So that one again, since it's in the MoText effector, you can use that to animate. If we go to formula, obviously we have the strength. There's different variables that can be added here. You can change those as well. If you go to parameter, we can consider right now it's just the scale and position, but you could do the rotation. Click rotation on. We ramp these up pretty high. Then you're going to get an animation of these things kind of moving around. And of course, it's kind of on a loop, right? It's like, kind of the animation is affected by the peak going up and then coming back down, right? So it's kind of moving in that sort of formation. And again, you can check these things on scale, position, and this can really get, kind of crazy after all. I think that you can change I'm trying to remember how to do this. The minimum and maximum, perhaps, that can be more subtle. Yeah, so you can change the minimum and the maximum to have it be a much more subtle sort of moving transition. But again, that is one that's on a continuous loop, and it will sort of move around. So between the random and the formula, I think there can be just some interesting things that can happen. And of course, you can have more than one effector in your palette. So maybe let's just try to do that. Let's put a random one in here too. And let's go to random and ramp this up. Okay. And there we go. The position is animated, and they're moving around. So between the just between those two, you can have some kind of interesting shaky text. All right. So I really encourage you today to think about playing around with the Mograph effectors, play around with MoText, see what types of different things you can come up with. I think it's helpful just to again experiment and see where the project can go. And then of course, if you have questions, let me know. I'm going to come around today, look at your ideas about those motion graphics sort of project that we're starting, and let me know if you have questions.